Remember when ranking the Espada was a challenge when there were only 10 of them? Now here I am, having finished the Bleach manga, about to rank over 25 characters that I met in the Thousand Year Blood War. Our villain group for this arc had over 25 members. Enough to fill the alphabet, rather than 1 through 10. That's over twice as many characters. So it's something that I've both been extremely excited for while going through the arc. It's always been in the back of my mind of how much do I like this character. I've also been dreading this because of the sheer size that the list and my notes would be. But here we are, and I'm ready to finally give my ranking of the Stern Ritter, from my least favorite to my favorite. When it comes to this group as a whole, I really enjoyed them. While there wasn't a lot of time to devote to each of them, considering just how many of them there are, they all had pretty memorable designs, despite mostly being in similar clothing. Their personalities, and by extension their abilities, also stood out for many of them, so that's been a big plus too in deciding which ones I like. As always, this is not a power ranking or anything like that. It's not about how strong they are. It is only based on how much I enjoy the characters and my personal favorites. Given that there are so many Stern Ritter, I'm sure that you and I will probably disagree on many of the placements here. So feel free to post your ranking below. It's all about personal taste. It's okay for us to disagree. And I'm excited to see how you rank these. And guys, I went back and forth on whether to include Yhwach and Uryu on this list. Hell, I even asked advice from some of my lovely patrons if I should include Yhwach, and even they were conflicted. But in the end, I've decided not to include them for a couple of reasons. I wanted this to be a ranking of the Stern Ritters that we met in the final arc, this new group of enemies. And Uryu, while technically a new member, really goes far beyond being a Stern Ritter since he's one of Bleach's main cast members from the beginning. It just doesn't seem fair to rank someone who's had hundreds of chapters as one of our heroes against these people. Plus, he was really a double agent the whole time, so was he really a member? So he's not going to be on the list. Yhwach, I just don't think of as a Stern Ritter since he's above them. He's the one they serve. Maybe he technically is, but I just don't think of him that way. So yeah, he's not going to be included, because to me that feels like if I was including Aizen in an Espada ranking, he doesn't feel like he's actually part of the group. But rest assured, I do plan at some point to try to rank the main villains of Bleach, so Yhwach will be ranked at some point on this channel. And I know both Yhwach and Uryu have shrifts, but we're just crossing A off this list entirely. A for the absent. But if you really must know, if I had to put them on this list, they would both be pretty high up. But I don't know that either of them would top my personal favorite or two, but they would both probably be top 5 at least if you really want to know how I would put them on the list. They're high up, guys. Come on. And lastly, I hate that I even have to say this, but obviously me liking a villain doesn't mean I condone their actions. Do you know how many times I've been like, man, I really enjoyed the Boltons as villains on Game of Thrones, and people are like, you like those people? They're disgusting. They flay people. I'm like, yeah, they're fun villains. They're evil. They're bad guys. All it means is I enjoy what they bring to the story, or I find them interesting. People get really weird about that stuff sometimes for some reason, and I don't understand. I can't believe I have to say this, but I don't support people being awful and evil in real life, but I sometimes definitely enjoy fictional villains being villains. Alright? Without further ado, let's finally talk about this army of antagonists. At number 28, I have Pepe, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that watches my videos. I went on like a 15-minute rant about how much I didn't enjoy his presence as a character. I get it, he's got a very vile form of love, and sure, that's effective for the little it was used, but I just didn't find him enjoyable or interesting, and I thought his fight with Byakuya is probably the weakest fight in the entire arc for me. So yeah, I just don't love Pepe. He wasn't scary enough to be intimidating. He wasn't funny enough to be a good gag character, and he was not entertaining enough to be enjoyable to read or watch. He was this huge letdown for me, honestly, after his initial attack on the research lab during the first invasion. I thought he seemed pretty scary then. That was before I saw him, and before I saw how he behaved. Just kind of lost any and all aura. I just didn't enjoy him as a character or as a villain in the slightest, and he's really the only Sternritter that I actively dislike and I think hurt the story rather than helped, and that's why he's at the very bottom of the list. I just don't have any love in my heart for Pepe. I just don't. At number 27, I have Shaz Domino, who I often forget exists. I completely forgot he existed until people pointed it out to me. Yeah, even then, he's still better than Pepe, if only for the gag. If you're also forgetting who Shaz Domino was, he's the guy that Ichigo immediately took out when he arrived at the first invasion. That's literally it. I don't know about this guy's letter. I guess he's a Sternritter, but all the letters are taken up by someone, so I suppose he must share a letter with someone. We know that's possible. The A was shared. The twins, Lloyd and Royd, they shared a shrift, so it's possible, so I assume he must share his letter with someone else. But yeah, Shaz Domino is apparently his name, and he apparently has a shrift power that we didn't get to see. Not that any of that really matters, I guess, with how quickly he was disposed of, but even then, Shaz Domino is still better than Pepe. He is. At number 26, I have Jerome. Yes, we have now entered the hallowed subsection of this ranking that I will call the Sacrificial Kenny Hype Trinity, which is quite the prestigious group that consists of the 3 Sternritter that Kenny brought down in quick succession during the invasion. So they contribute to one of my favorite moments of his in the series, so at least all 3 of them have that. As for Jerome specifically, he's got kind of a cool design, very beast-like, which makes sense because Jerome can roar loudly. Yeah. At number 25, I have Lloyd. He doesn't contribute nearly as much as his identical twin, and he makes the same mistake that Gremmy eventually makes, thinking he can replicate Kenny's power when he can't really. But yeah, he's very disposable, and yes, so was Lloyd, but at least his brother was disposable as part of a plan. He wasn't just immediately killed. But we'll get into Royd in a bit. When it comes to Lloyd, he just kind of gets killed, and that's it. And who names their kid Lloyd? Come on, Mom and Dad. What are we doing? At least you had a little variety with Lloyd. At number 24, we have Berenice. Who? That's the real question. I did like that Kenny ripped his throat out so he couldn't ask any of his questions. That was fun. That power might have been interesting, we'll never know, but yeah, these last 3 were there to give us one of the great Kenpachi panels in the series, so that is something, even if they had to die to do it. Yeah, they were kind of just throwaway characters. At number 23, Driscoll, the Overkill. I appreciate his whole overkill gag, whether it's that he gets stronger the more people he kills, which is a funny play on words, or it's that he does everything overkill, including how he speaks. He repeats a lot of things. It's just too much, it's too much. What we didn't get too much of was Driscoll himself, but he still had enough time to embarrass Hisagi and serve as a hype builder for Old Man Yama. So once again, it's a character that was just kind of used to make one of our heroes have a great entrance into the battle. So yeah, maybe we could have seen more of him. That might have been fun, but it also might have been overkill. At 22, I have Song-do, who was pretty generic, honestly, and is one I've struggled to remember at times. Not as bad as struggling to remember Shaz Domino, but I feel like I should have more reason to remember Song-do, but I don't. Like, the only time I've thought about him in the past, 6 months, until this video right now, is when I realized how similar Toji from JJK looks to Song-do. It's uncanny, but Toji is way cooler, and also Song-do's iron shrift didn't really amount to anything. He tries to protect himself with it by coating his body in iron, and it doesn't work. Also, him using Hitsugaya's Bankai didn't matter much either. We didn't really get to see him do anything cool with it, so yeah, I don't know. Song-do's fine, but pretty boring and forgettable in the long run, so sorry, Song-do. At number 21, we have Nanana Najaku. I thought Najaku was going to be a little more present than he ended up being. I kind of love how wacky his design is, and the scanning power is kind of cool, but damn, does he end up doing a whole lot of nothing. He's got a fun design, a fun name, but that's really kind of it. Otherwise, he's just kind of one of the Sternritter. Doesn't really have a big moment, besides attacking Aizen, I guess. That was, I don't know. Not enough. Not enough. He's staying at 21. Sorry, Najagoop. Great name. Every time I typed notes for him on my phone, in my discussion videos, it would autocorrect Nanana to banana, so there was a lot of banana Najagoop in my phone, even in this script that I'm reading right now. Banana Najagoop. You could have been better. At number 20, we've got Royd Lloyd, the second half of the twins, and you know what? I actually really liked the concept of him and his brother. The idea that, twins would share a power is a nice little ripple in all of this, and I think it's a really big oh no moment when you realize Yamamoto had been wearing himself out against an imposter of Yuabaha the whole time, and seeing Royd throw his life away like that was a perfect way to show us the lengths that some of the subordinates would go to for their Quincy King. Plus, that's a really good fight, and that was Royd Lloyd as Yuabaha during that great fight. Well done. Really well performed. At number 19, I have Weisel. Weirdness sometimes gets you far in my book, and Weisel was really, really weird with his two tongues and his power to wind things around himself. It's a really unique power, and maybe he would have been higher if he appeared for more time than the 2 minutes he appeared as Yuabaha's human shield. But frankly, Weisel was really memorable despite such a tiny, minuscule amount of time on screen. So that says something, doesn't it? I could have used more of him, but I think he's a prime example of Yuabaha favoring utility in his subordinates more than anything else. It's about what they can do to serve his cause. At number 18, I have Meninas. I think she may be the kindest of the Bambis or the least openly hostile, but otherwise, Meninas didn't leave much of an impression or impact on me. I like the juxtaposition of her being all gentle and cutesy while being this physical behemoth that drops mountains on people, but she's the member of the Bambis that slips my mind most easily. I just think she was lacking a really cool moment when her friends all had at least a little something more here and there. I honestly would have loved to have seen her and Chad punch it out, but that obviously didn't happen. Meninas just needed a moment to really shine, and it just never came for her, unfortunately. She really blends into the background. Sorry. At number 17, I have Gwenel Lee. You may be thinking, Gwenel Lee, wasn't he just a figment of Gremmy's imagination? Yes, he was. Does he really count then? I don't know, but he does here on my list. The truth of his existence was a great twist, honestly, that really helped to introduce Gremmy's capabilities. But I still think Gwenel himself is worth mentioning and giving a spot to because of his unique power. The Vanishing Point, another guy that shared a letter, except, he was just kind of part of Grammy anyway. And he deserved a spot as well for just how creepy and unsettling he is. His introduction is really memorable to me, especially in the manga, because it suddenly felt like a horror movie out of nowhere. His vanishing power was way cooler than I thought it was going to be. I thought it would only be invisibility, but it turned out there were 3 aspects of it, where eventually he disappears entirely, even from memory, which is a crazy concept, but I loved the payoff with Yashiru. She didn't even care that he disappeared and that she didn't remember him, just instinctively knew, I need to punch this man in the face. But yeah, in the end, he's really just used as a weird, off-putting herald for Gremmy's arrival, a small display of what imagination can conjure. But he's creepy, so extra points from me. At number 16, I have Candace Catnip. I had high hopes for Candace Catnip based on having an incredible name, like maybe the greatest name in the series. But unfortunately, she didn't blow me away once we actually got to know her. She's kind of just this angry, unhinged powder keg at times, and that's kind of it. Her lightning powers are kind of rad, I like lightning powers, but besides that, she's alright. Serviceable enough. I do love Ichigo completely showing her up after his training. I wish she lived up to the wonderful name. At 15, Bambietta. I almost put Bambi higher, but I think she belongs middle of the pack when it comes down to it. Bambi is great at making herself easy to hate because she's one of the most despicable people that we see in the Stern Ritter. Like Candace Catnip, she's just really volatile and hateful, but I'd put Bambi above her as far as a character because I found her a bit scarier in a few respects and a little more interesting. Namely, whatever horrifying ritual that was, where she chooses a random guy to sleep with before murdering them right after. Horrifying, like serial killer vibes. We never went back to that. That was just a weird little hobby that Kubo showed us that Bambi's into. So that was weird and scary. And she also got under my skin in her treatment of Komamora, but she was solid as an antagonist overall. Her explosive powers and the specifics of what they do exactly was also really cool. It's really not surprising that the friend group is called the Bambis because Bambi really did leave an impression. And I gotta say, as hateable as she was, as awful of a person as she was, her fate was really disturbing. And I did feel a little bad about that because of just how horrible her torment was after her death. I was okay with Bambi getting killed. Bambi being brought back as this zombie who's in like a constant state of hunger and pain, just looks like she's suffering a lot. That was crazy. It's worse than she deserved, and she deserved a bad ending, but I felt bad. Yeah, I felt bad. As terrible as she was, there was someone worse. At number 14, I have Robert. My boy Bobby should be higher, even though I know a lot of you might be shocked he's even this high. But yeah, unfortunately we didn't get to see much of him, but I still really like him. I love how plain he looks among the Sternritter with his Commissioner Gordon vibe. Like he's just this middle-aged guy you'd walk by on the sidewalk. And his mysterious briefcase. What's in the briefcase? With the little we do see of him, he manages to take Shunsui's eye, which is more damage than a lot of the Sternritter can say that they did. He certainly did more than the Sacrificial Kenny hype squad. He certainly did more than Pepe, so yeah, give Bobby his flowers for doing that much damage to Shunsui. And I also found his end in the manga to be super effective, and I was shocked they took it out of the anime. But maybe that means the anime is saving him for Robert to be the final antagonist. It's possible, guys. We don't know what's in that briefcase. It could literally be anything. The legs of the Soul King might be in that briefcase. At number 13, I have Giselle. And I know Giselle Jewel is hated by a lot of people, including my friend, and may be one of the most disturbing sadistic characters in the series given the treatment of Bambietta and everyone else that she speaks to and talks to and does anything to. But I don't know, I thought Gigi was fun. There are villains that are warped and evil, and you would despise them in real life, but I find them enjoyable to read. And that was Gigi for me. I love me some zombies, so bringing that necromancy vibe into the series was fun, especially when that went up against Mayori's brand of necromancy. Good stuff. I really liked that part of the war a lot, actually, even though it's pretty inconsequential overall. But she was a really big part of that, and what made that whole section kind of fun. Gigi brought some gross, macabre fun, and I just appreciate that. I get why people hate her. She's a terrible, terrible person, but sometimes I want a villain who's just awful and has no reservations about just being terrible. No hope of redemption, just a terrible, terrible person. That's Gigi, and that's fun sometimes. I don't know. I like Gigi. At number 12, I have Mask/James. You know, Mask could have so easily been just some brutish strongman, like the Nappa of the group. And in a lot of ways he is that, but at least he's entertaining about it. At least he's a showman. The James aspect of it all was particularly compelling. It not only gives his abilities a unique facet, but also raised so many questions to ponder about the existence of this individual. However you want to interpret his presence, whether he is a little wrestling fan manifesting his ideal self, or a wrestler conjuring his own #1 fan as a battery, I think he's really fascinating either way. His fight was fun too. I love his theatrical wrestling moves, and the James of it all gave it just enough intrigue as well. I really liked the whole concept behind this character, and I think it was a good use of like a masked luchador type of figure. At number 11, Liege Barrow. I don't particularly like dogmatic people like Barrow who have no self-awareness, but I think he was a very effective villain in that kind of archetype as a self-righteous, pious, holier-than-thou individual. It fit for the whole theme with the Quincy's where they're kind of these angelic beings serving God, you know. I thought he represented that aspect of them really well. And snipers are cool, and the X-axis shrift was crazy. The concept of that was like, oh, that's not good, especially if you can aim well. And he had that creepy, weird angel owl form that was good too. Just personality-wise, he just wasn't one of my favorites, but I did think he was very effective. And I liked his battle with Shunsui and Nanao quite a bit. But yeah, I liked him well enough. He just didn't quite crack the top 10. And here we are, the top 10. Gremmy. Gremmy breaks into the top 10 for me because despite his brief appearance, he's actually extremely memorable and maybe one of the most powerful characters we see in the series. First off, the power itself is legitimately insane, where whatever he imagines becomes reality. If he wants to turn you into cookies, he just thinks about it, he imagines it, you're cookies. That's crazy. It just feels so extremely overpowered where it sounds like he should be utterly unstoppable, but that's honestly what's so great about it for me is that he's actually not. His only limit is the limit of his imagination, and I really love how Kubo stuck to that, where his mindset and creativity was everything for someone that has also apparently been kept very sheltered. He was a bit limited in the scope of what he could think about, and his mental fortitude. If he had a moment of fear and imagined himself losing, suddenly he's losing. It's an interesting dichotomy I really liked. It's kind of a weakness of his ability that made a lot of sense. He isn't able to do anything, he's only able to do what he can imagine. And so he's really relying on that aspect of his brain, and it turns out he's only a brain, which is also kind of weird and interesting. Is he the Soul King's brain? I don't know. That would kind of make sense, I feel like. But yeah, he turned out to just be a brain in a jar. Plus, he tried to bring down an entire meteor on the whole battle. That was a great moment. I liked Gremmy. He was scary, and you could tell, especially in the manga, there are a few moments where it makes it clear that even his own teammates are afraid of him. I liked that. His fight in the anime felt a little bit rushed compared to the manga, but yeah. Gremmy makes the top 10. At number 9, ironically, I have BG9, who needed more. He was really scary, because what do you mean the Quincy have like this murderous robot that speaks in analytics and is perfectly fine dispensing torture and murder, including skewering a child, and he has a hidden Gatling gun and missile launchers? I love myself a cool robot, and BG9 was a cool robot. Why do they have a robot? I don't know, but he was awesome, and I needed more of him. I just really liked BG9. He was great. What do you mean there's a robot? At number 8, I have Pernita, who is very weird, but in such fascinating and mysterious ways. You would think that taking off his hood and no longer being a Jawa would make him less enigmatic, but realizing he's an arm of the Soul King only raises so many more questions. I'd love to learn more about his existence and why he serves the Quincy's, and thematically he was the perfect enemy to take on Mayuri, and especially Nemu, but he was super powerful, pretty weird and scary. His power to just mess with you was pretty wild. I really liked Pernita. I'm fascinated by his whole deal that we didn't really get to fully see, but I liked his position in the story. So Pernita, number 8. At number 7, I have Lil Toto. You may have noticed Lil Toto ranks way higher for me than the rest of her friend group. The others are all pretty loud and psychotic in their own ways, and it's because of that Lil stands out in contrast to them. She's like the Shikamaru of the group, and I love Shikamaru. And I'm not saying she's not a bit crazy. She eats people, and she really seems to enjoy it, but her quieter, ambivalent demeanor was just so funny and enjoyable to read, and I just really liked a lot of her moments. She seemed sensible, in the middle of all that craziness. Imagine being on that team. The only one she could maybe have a normal conversation with is maybe Maninas. Everyone else, she's probably just why am I stuck with these people? And I appreciate that energy. Lil Toto, number 7. At number 6, I have Gerard Valkyrie. Gerard is the perfect example of a character that doesn't have much depth, but it's just so much fun. He has that kind of Kenpachi quality where the guy just wants to fight. It doesn't matter who. It doesn't matter how many. He'll dive headfirst without a second thought. It's about the glory of battle, much like the Viking aesthetics he's clearly inspired by from his design. Yes, he is simple, and yes, his fight's ending is definitely a bit disappointing in the manga. Hopefully will be fixed in the anime. But I enjoyed Gerard a lot when he was there, and there was a lot of Gerard to enjoy. He turned into a giant skyscraper-sized man, and that was really cool. I think he did it much better than Yami. And despite how one-dimensional he seems, there are a few little hints of something more interesting there, like his origin as, the heart of the Soul King? What's up with that? Is he literally the Soul King's heart? Is it a Mimihagi situation? He's sharing the body with the heart of the Soul King? I don't know. But Gerard Valkyrie is fun, always smiling, always having a good time, right until the moment where he gets kind of a disappointing ending. But yeah, Gerard, I liked him a lot. He reminds me of Thor, and I love Thor. So at number 5, I have Ugram Haschwalth. I instinctively don't tend to like characters like Haschwalth. I don't ride with sycophants sucking up to authority who abandon their own sense of self to be a follower, but man, Kubo found a way to make that kind of character extremely compelling. Haschwalth was someone that seemed literally powerless, who found that he had power of his own and a purpose that he wasn't aware of, but that might require giving up everything he used to be. There were a lot of interesting ideas with him, and it was really great stuff. And he may be one of the most complex characters in the 1,000-Year Blood War. And that's impressive because he could have so easily just been the loyal yes man and that's it, but to actually get to peel back the layers of trauma to understand why he is so devoted to Yuabaha was a great decision. And his final moments were so touching where, you realize he lived his life a certain way and he does have regrets. He just never had the chance to really express them. He was all around just a really balanced antagonist by the end. I really liked Haschwalth. Number 5. At number 4, I have Kyuuge, and putting Kyuuge this high may seem like insanity to some people since he was taken out so early in the arc, but there are a lot of reasons that I really enjoyed Kyuuge. For one thing, he was entertaining in his villainy, so casual while straight up slaughtering my hollow babies. The dark humor with him was on point. He was just having a great time, and that was terrible for everyone that was remotely close to him. Yeah, he was great. And yes, I took him going after my hollows very personally, but he was so much fun about it, so I couldn't really hold it against him. On top of being the real herald for the new villains, Kyuuge also feels like the most Quincy among all of these Quincy's, He didn't rely so much on his individual shrift like so many of the others. Really, he doesn't go to that until it's a last resort. No, he used powers that were familiar Quincy powers that we already knew, like amped up versions of everything we saw Uryu do. But now those arrows are flying in our direction. And the extreme versions of those abilities felt like natural expansions of the kinds of things that we've already seen. And the kind of things that Uryu wouldn't have done, like straight up absorbing people. It was great. He was awful, but he was great. And just had so much fun being bad, He really brought those horrific evil vibes early into the arc and established the threat very clearly. So Kyuuge's high up here, guys. I really, really liked Kyuuge. At number 3, we have Baz B, who turned out to be much more complicated than I thought he would be when I first saw him. Like, much, much more. I wouldn't have thought that the guy that seemed kind of like this obnoxious punk was gonna be one of the most fleshed out backstories out of all the villains. I thought he was just kind of gonna be the hothead, kind of Grimjow type character, and he still is, but there was so much more to him than that. And his flashback was so good. His battle with Ugram, that feudal fight with his former friend, beautiful section of the series. I really liked Baz, and I think he was understandable in his anger and his hatred, and I would have loved to have seen him get his revenge, but I think it falls in line with what happens with vengeance in this series, that he was unsuccessful and tragic, and he was really surprising. I really appreciated Baz by the end, and, his little storyline throughout the war. Alright, at number 2, I have As Not, and it was tough for me to put As Not at number 2, like really difficult considering how much I love him as a villain and how much he really jives with my love of spooky things, but this is where he ends up. I will always appreciate the horror vibes that he brought back to the series, and that I think the series could have used even more of. He really brought this sense of fear and tension to everything he did, naturally, and used that fear in a lot of effective ways. I thought he really lived up to his moniker, and even said a lot about him personally. The brief glimpse we got of his backstory was thought-provoking, and even more for me now after learning more about Yuabaha's goals. The Quincy King's attempt to create a world where people don't need to fear death is kind of encapsulated by As Not, who, he had been dying and on the verge of death and had been saved, living in fear that he would ever be put back back in that position. He was defined by fear as well as using it as a weapon, and there was a lot of layers to him. And I don't even mean that as a joke. He literally sheds his own skin sometimes, and has these amazing different forms. Whether it was his Volsterndish, which was like nightmare fuel, or the one that went even beyond that, where he like peeled away his body to show his disfigured true self, which was even more nightmare fuel. He was great. He was scary. I loved his design. I loved his aesthetics. I loved everything about him. I just think maybe he would have taken top spot if he actually succeeded in killing Byakuya, honestly. Not finishing him off took away from the terror that Asnot was inspiring in his first appearance just a little bit. I think he was the perfect enemy for Rukia to overcome as well. So yeah, it was tough not to put him at the top because I do love him. And if you asked me, for the whole year I was reading Thousand Year Blood War pretty much, who's your favorite Sternritter so far? I probably would have said Asnot, and hell, he could easily bounce back to my favorite tomorrow. But as of today, the time of this recording, he just narrowly misses the top of the mountain, I'm afraid. At number 1, yes, you guessed it, I have Askin Naklavar, who is my absolute favorite of the Sternritter. I really didn't expect him to be, but that's part of his whole shtick, really. He thrives on being underestimated until the time is right, and he managed that with me too. That aspect of his character that seemed to do everything to avoid confrontation, that didn't seem very threatening, was something that notably separated him from his peers early on. It made him stand out, it was funny, but it was also intriguing and a great setup for the payoff of seeing him be the only one of the initial vanguard to be able to ascend as a member of the Quincy Royal Guard. And his powers were also some of the most unique among all these powers, and made him extremely powerful in a subtler way. Guys, he dropped Ichigo with ease off panel and pushed Namaya, Yoruichi, and Urahara really far. So I loved how much of a monster Naklavar turned out to be, and it was in such a different way too. He was intimidating without ever losing his humor and his charm. He wasn't the most fleshed out character maybe, but many of the Sternritter aren't, and he more than makes up for it by being so fun to watch and to read. I think he's a huge highlight of the final arc, honestly. He's not constantly aura farming and showing grand displays of being a badass, but he's still so powerful, while also being wacky and goofy and completely unexpected. Took me by surprise. I really thought Asnot was going to be number 1, but we've got to give it to the death-dealing Askin Naklavar, who throughout all of his shenanigans has found his way to the top of this list as the greatest Sternritter in my opinion. So yes, there we have it. The Sternritter are ranked, besides the couple that we left out. I hope that was a fun ranking list. I'm glad I finally got to do this. I've been thinking about this in the back of my mind throughout the whole arc, and I just kept adding to it with the more characters we got introduced to. I hope I covered everyone. That would be really embarrassing if I forgot anyone. I think I've got everyone that I wanted to put on. We'll see. I'm sure you'll let me know. But yeah, that'll do it. A pretty big ranking, long awaited. I'm glad I finally got to do this. Just another surreal thing that's hitting me now that I've finished the series. I could finally do this list. As always, if you want to support the channel, please like, comment, subscribe. And if you want to support even more, we have Patreon where I do all sorts of read-alongs, anime viewings, tons of fun stuff over there. So we're going to be watching Core 4 of the anime on the Patreon once that starts. So yeah, come on over there, help out the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye.